What's up, everybody? Welcome into WCG Radio. This is episode 22. We're on the eve of free agency, about a few days out from the new league year. But we still have a lot to get to. The scouting combine just finished up, still in the thick of draft season. And there's not many better people to discuss all of these topics with, than Dan Kadar, who is NFL or SB Nation NFL's draft editor. You know him as Mocking the Draft. It's one of the best draft resources you can find on our fair internet. Dan, what's up?
Hey, thanks for having me.
Dan, so you were at the combine, and I just mentioned it right away. We're going to get into Bears stuff, but I wanted to discuss your top takeaways in general. So let's start with the receivers. Who stuck out to you? Who left a lot to be desired? We can start with those two questions.
Sure. Well, I think whenever you start with wide receiver, you have to talk about Calvin Ridley first of Alabama. And, you know, I didn't expect him to come in big and stuff like that, but he was a little thin. I thought his 40 time was fine. I thought his workout numbers were, his workout itself was fine, but like I think his vertical leap was pretty not great. He came in kind of skinny, did run a 4.4, which is good, but he didn't really help himself, I didn't think, that much. I think his draft range to me has always been where the Bears pick and going backward. And now I kind of wonder if he really is more in the teens than inside the top 10. DJ Moore of Maryland, I thought he's really good. I think he helped himself quite a bit. I think Cortland Sutton of SMU helped himself quite a bit. DJ Shark from LSU. You know, he's a guy who's a vertical player and a second or third round pick, but, you know, he ran it faster than I think people expected, which was good. I think some people watched his game and they were like, looks like he plays fast, but how fast does he really play? And he timed really well. So he did well. You know, then some of these other guys like Auden Tate of Florida State or Marcel Aitman of Oklahoma State, you know, they were just kind of run of the mill, to be quite honest. So, you know, in this wide receiver group that's just a big, hodgepodge, I don't think any of these players really did quite enough to say, yep, we got to get him really high, or yeah, this guy really rose up in the process. It's still kind of a specialty position this year.
In regards to Ridley, not even in the teens, is he enough of an athletic freak in your mind to, like, for anybody to like pick in the first round? I remember seeing something on Twitter. I don't know who had it, but someone with like his overall athletic profile hasn't been picked in the first round in 20 years.
Yeah. I mean, that's the worst thing about this time of year, where
it's overanalyzed, right?
Yeah, and you watch Calvin Ridley play for 2 years or whatever it was at Alabama, and you say, yep, this guy's a first rounder. And now he's in the part of the process that's unkind to him, where he's going to get picked apart. People are going to point out his age and stuff like that. But on the field, he can do it. I mean, he's not going to be a contested catch guy, but, you know, neither was Reggie Wayne. And I kind of think that's the comparison for him, where he's just this super crafty route runner that knows how to get himself open and can create these pockets of space for your quarterback. And, you know, in the how fast did he run, how high did he jump, how tall is he kind of world war in March, he's a guy that kind of gets less than some. And to me, like I said, he's kind of like Reggie Wayne, where you put him on the field, he's going to get you 80 catches a year. He's probably going to average 11, 12, 13 yards a catch. He's not going to be some eye-popping, 18-yard a catch guy, but, I think that's okay. I think he's a really solid, pretty bankable player.
He'll be a high-level Robin, essentially.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's a good description. Offensive linemen, so someone that really helped themselves and someone that kind of, didn't do as well.
Yeah, well, not doing as well as obviously Orlando
Yeah.
Brown of Oklahoma, and that's the easy one. And as much as I just said about Calvin Ridley, how you shouldn't, hold his workout against him, Orlando Brown's was just so bad where you have to just wonder, gosh, what's the deal here? And how much of his game is just being gigantic. And I don't think anybody expected him to run well on the 40. I think people expected him to do a little bit better in the bench press and stuff like that, but he didn't help himself really at all. So he's kind of the stock down in that group. And kind of similarly, Connor Williams of Texas, I don't think there was anything about what he did there, whether it was interviews or whatever, where you would say, yep, he has to go up. Mm-hmm. So it's not always the workout stuff. It's everything. And, these guys had a chance to really say, okay, Orlando Brown is kind of bombing here. Here's our opportunity. And none of the tackle players stepped up, I didn't think, other than maybe Colton Miller of UCLA, who is just an athletic marvel. But,
yeah,
other guys, Will Hernandez of UTEP, he's kind of been acing the whole offseason process. I mean, people like me knew about him because we're huge draft nerds in September. Mm-hmm. And we're saying, hey, watch this guy from UTEP. Who's watching UTEP? So he's really done well for himself at the Senior Bowl, now at the Combine. And you really wonder how high can he go? Is he going to be a first-round player? And same thing for Isaiah Wynn of Georgia. He's a really talented player too. And Billy Price of Ohio State tore his pec muscle doing the bench press. He's a strength-only player, kind of. So maybe the stock's down a little bit on him. Flip side, James Daniels of Iowa, super athletic. I think his stock's up a little bit. So you are seeing a little bit of movement on the line here.
Who would you be more confident long-term after seeing them up close now, Combine? Hernandez or Wynn for any team?
That's tough because I really like Wynn. I think he's a plug-and-play guy. I think he's a guy who, if your left tackle goes down, he can play out there.
Really?
Yeah, I do. I mean, he did that at Georgia last season, and he was just fine. I know he doesn't have the length and stuff, but I don't know. I like Wynn, I guess, is more of a versatile positional-wise and scheme-wise. I think Hernandez is a little more of a power scheme guard only. Whereas Wynn, like I said, he can play outside a little bit. He can obviously play inside. Some people talked about him maybe playing center. So I guess I'm going to say Wynn, but it's really splitting hairs with those two.
Defensive backs. So I would imagine the stories will surround Derwin James and Minkah Fitzpatrick. But so both again, who did really well for themselves and who. And who left much to be desired.
Sure. Well, I'll tell you what. Derwin James was my favorite person to partake in his interview session, hands down. And it's weird, the Combine. I don't know how super familiar you are with it or anybody listening really, but the way it works is the players and coaches and general managers, but more so the players, they all come up at these different podiums at the same time. And you kind of had to pick and choose, who, like SB Nation had 5 people there this year, which is great, but we had to choose, okay, I'm going to be a Derwin James, so you don't be a Derwin James and go to this and go to this. So anyway, it's kind of like speed dating, really, because these guys come up there and you get 15 minutes and you have to try and impress them with great, smart questions. So Derwin James, I really had my eye on doing because he's so versatile. So I'm trying to figure out what the heck he is. And a couple days before, I asked some of his teammates, what do you do with him? And, Josh Sweat, I think, said he should play weak side linebacker. And Derek Noddy, the nose tackle of Florida State, said he needs to play the middle linebacker spot. And, Derwin came up and he was like, teams have been talking to me about playing slot cornerback and stuff like that. And he's all over the place positionally, but he's super intelligent. Like, he's a guy who At Florida State, he had to go to the linebacker meetings, the defensive back meetings, and sometimes they had like blitz meetings. He had to sit in on those.
Damn.
Yeah, he's real impressive. I like him a lot. I think he's a guy who blew the whole combine process away, to be quite honest. And like you said, Minka did great. And he's super engaging too. And someone who maybe didn't help himself, I love Josh Jackson of Iowa. I'm sure there are some of your listeners here who are Iowa fans there in the Midwest, but boy, I'll tell you what, he really looked bad, I thought, in movement drills and stuff like that. And he's a guy who played zone heavy at Iowa, and I think he's a zone only player, so that kind of hurts his value a little bit. But it happens. And conversely, a guy like Jair Alexander of Louisville, he jumped up because he looked so fluid and athletic working out. So that's how the defensive backs look to me.
In regards to Jackson, I've had concerns personally about him being kind of a one-year wonder. Is that what a lot of people may be discussing with him after like the kind of meh combine? I mean, because I also you watch him a little bit, he looks kind of stiff for a guy that's supposed to be really long and athletic and a ball hawk. Yeah,
he did look stiff. And when you have the questions about being a one-year player, basically, which are real for him, and you tack on to how just really unfluid he looked at times, that's kind of a red flag where you say, okay, we like Josh Jackson, we like Carlton Davis of Auburn just as much, or we like Isaiah Oliver of Colorado just as much. We don't have the same questions about those two guys as we do about Josh Jackson. That's what knocks Josh Jackson down a little bit.
I noticed you didn't mention Denzel Ward. What do you think about him?
Oh, he's great. I mean, he was a guy who I was really curious about having a bad combine, because he was listed at Ohio State at 5'10", and Ohio State has this tendency, at least with their 40 times, to embellish them. So part of my mind is like, okay, if you're going to lie about players 40 times that they run in the spring, are you really being honest about a guy's size?
Mm-hmm.
And so I was curious to see what he measured in at. And if he came in at under 5'10", that's a threshold thing for the NFL. Jason Verrett, a few years ago, he was the best cornerback in the draft, but he came in at 5'9" something, and he fell all the way into the 20s to the Chargers. Very good player if he stays healthy, but he dropped. So I wondered that about Ward. He came in just under 5'11", super fast, really athletic, and Ohio State's really pumping out cornerbacks, and he's really good.
Before we get to the next position, because you kind of just mentioned it, you guys have SB Nation had 5 interviews. So who were the other 4 interviews? And so Derwin James was number 1. So rank could be 1 through 5 after Derwin James.
Oh, I'm sorry, I was unclear. We had 5 people at the combine from SB Nation who were there doing the interviews.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Never mind. Then we'll get to that later. I'm sorry.
Sure.
I was confused. I was like,
yeah, no. If we only had 5 people to pick from the whole combine, that would be awful.
Not much coverage there.
Right.
Okay. My bad. Outside linebackers. So not defense. Well, I mean, it depends on how you project it. So let's just go edge. Sure. Edge players.
Boy, it's funny how people look at that now, isn't it? How it used to be, okay, my rankings are 3-4 outside linebackers, 4-3 outside linebackers, middle linebackers, ends, tackles. And now it's defensive lineman, edge, linebacker. But the edge guys, I don't include Tremaine Edmonds in that group.
I noticed. Hold on, we're looking at it right now. I noticed you listed him as an outside linebacker in your latest mock, which we'll also get to.
Yeah, it's a little funny how I've been doing. I haven't settled on it, but the edge guys, Bradley Chubb, I think, different kind of player, obviously, but he's an edge player. I thought he was great. Again, he was kind of like Ward. I kind of wondered how he would be and how athletic he would be, and he answered every question. Harold Landry of Boston College really helped himself. Sam Hubbard of Ohio State is a guy that, I think as the next month goes along, I think more people are going to start getting into a little bit more. I thought LSU's Arden Key kind of stunk, to be honest with you. I mean, he's athletic, but it's unfair to compare guys from schools sometimes. We just look at him and say he's Barkevius Mingo all over again, where he's just this undersized edge rusher who's going to get killed by blockers. So, some of the top guys look good, and some of the top guys didn't look good. Deeper down, I thought Lorenzo Carter of Georgia, he really helped himself. And you wonder, if the Bears don't take an edge player, a linebacker type of player in the first round, if he's a guy that they look at 39.
He's essentially Leonard Floyd. I mean,
yeah. Less productive, unfortunately. That's where you have to go back with some of these guys and say, man, he looked really athletic, but just didn't do it in game. Why? And if you can find a good reason why it didn't happen and you still like him, that's when you take him at 39 and say he's a 6'5" super athlete. But Josh Sweat from Florida State's a guy who all I cared about was
he's a favorite.
Yeah, well, all I cared about was his medical stuff. So when I went up to his podium for the media part, that's all I asked him about, because a lot of times, these guys will really get put through the ringer and spend over an hour in medical, and teams will give him a failing grade, or they'll say he has a degenerative issue in his knee or wherever. And he didn't have any of that. All his medicals went pretty fast. So he's a guy you look at and you think, maybe give him a year of developmental time in the NFL. He's a really great athlete.
So we'll do it with two guys. We'll do it with the three names you mentioned. Does Arden Key get drafted by the end of the second round? So does he get drafted in the top? In the second, does he get drafted that high, like at any point?
If you're asking if he's a top 64 player, I'm going to say yeah. But if you're asking if he's a first round player, I'm starting to lean toward no, unfortunately for him.
Does Harold Landry leave the top 20?
At this point, I'm going to say no, just because the ankle stuff he had doesn't seem like a problem anymore. And when he's on, I think he's the best pass rusher in this draft. So
that's going to be valued.
Yeah, and you look at the Packers, for instance, at 14. Boy, he would be perfect there. I hate to say on a Bears thing, but yeah, he's real good. Yeah.
Does Josh Sweat leave the top 40?
Yeah, I think so. Just because he's still kind of a wait and see player, so I think his range is more probably late second into the third round.
Okay, that makes sense. So this isn't as relevant to the Bears' this position, but he's probably the most talented prospect. I'd imagine he helped himself the most of these guys, Saquon Barkley and the running backs.
Oh yeah, when you start getting ready for the combine and you do your notes preparing and you do your pre-writes and all your preview work basically. Mm-hmm. You have the guys who are the top guys, and there's nothing that they can do, good or bad, to get any better, and you just know what to expect. Saquon Barkley blew that out of the water completely.
Wow.
I mean, yeah. I knew he was going to look great. I knew he was going to time great. I knew he was going to interview great. He did it exceptionally well in every single area. And it's easy to see why a lot of people think that he's the best player in the draft. So he obviously helped himself somehow. Some way he helped himself. Darius Geis from LSU, I think he's right up there as the number 2 running back. And I think he had a pretty good combine, even though he had the weird interview stuff, which maybe we'll get into. Nick Chubb of Georgia. Yeah, I thought he's kind of gotten a raw deal because everyone's kind of become Sony Michel fans, thinking he's the next Alvin Kamara and stuff like that. But Nick Chubb, really strong. I think he timed pretty well, if I recall off the top of my head. But he's a guy where he's going to be in competition with Sony Michel this whole time, and he kind of helped himself. John Kelly at Tennessee, from what I've been told, he did really well in the interview stuff with teams. So, it's a good year for running backs, basically. And even if you don't take one high, I think if you draft for depth this year at that position, you're going to be pretty good to go.
I wanted to so one question will be directly related to you, and then the other will be the Bears with the running backs. Should the Browns take Saquon Barkley with one of their top 4 picks? Should they take him at number 1 overall?
I would not take him at number 1 overall, just from the standpoint of the Browns somehow managed to have, I think according to Football Outsiders, the 10th best rushing attack in the NFL last season.
Right.
With Isaiah Crowell, who is unbelievably inconsistent, and Duke Johnson, a player they just don't give the ball to. And they had a 30-second passing offense. So to me, that makes it pretty simple. And then you add in the fact of general positional value and general manager John Dorsey's history at running back. I mean, he just took Kareem Hunt last year in the 3rd round. So with all that said, I wouldn't take him 1st overall, but I do think he would be in the discussion for 1st overall just because of how great he is, but I don't think he'll be the pick. I do think if he's there at 4, though, I think that's where you would see him go to Cleveland. When you
mock Sam Darnold in your latest mock, is that your preference, or is that what you think the Browns will do? And if not, what's your preference?
That is what I think the Browns will do, from the standpoint of I really think their owner, Jimmy Haslam, is going to be maybe afraid to take Baker Mayfield because he might think he's Johnny Manziel. Whether that's fair or not, it's probably not fair at all. But
yeah,
he's burned on that. So you got to wonder there. And my preference is Josh Rosen from UCLA, just because I think he's a better pure passer out of the gate. I think if you're in a situation, and Cleveland always finds himself in this situation where they have to, rush the guy out there and put him in, I think Rosen is the most pro-ready of all these guys. And, Darnold, but I think they'll like Darnold the most just because the Browns are so bad and he is so inflappable, where when they're losing game after game after game, I think he's going to be just cool as a cucumber and be a guy that can rally the team. Like last season, I record a podcast for the Browns for my day job at a newspaper. We have a guy that covers the Browns, and last season he was like, "There's no way this team's going to win a game." And the year before that, he said the team just had this different attitude, and even though they went 1-15, he knew they were going to get 1 at some point. And last year, just hope was dead completely. I think a guy like Sam Darnold, excuse me, golly.
Oh wow, yeah.
Woo! Maybe I'm previewing free agency, but Sam Darnold, I just think is just a natural, just a natural captain, just cool. And he's got an arm. I think he has to figure out the turnover stuff, but I think some of the Andrew Luck type of stuff is there with him.
Okay, I can see that logic. We'll get some more Browns plans later. As regards to running backs for the Bears, so we're not sure how much real smoke there is to this, but I'm of the opinion that Jordan Howard isn't long for Chicago, whether it's this year or whether it's by the end of his rookie deal. It would behoove them to find a guy that could catch the ball and who's more versatile than Howard, that fits better in Matt Nagy's offense than with Mitch Trubisky. If they wanted to find that guy this year, who would you pick for them, and where should they take him?
I would target Kalen Ballage of Arizona State.
Yes! Dan, thank you. My favorite.
And I would package your 2 4th-round picks to go get him in the 3rd round. And I think that's what you might have to do to get him. I think just a scheme-wise, I think he is exactly what you're talking about. So I would think about him. I think if you wait a long time, maybe Ralph Webb of Vanderbilt is a player to keep in mind. But yeah, Ballage, I mean, what a perfect scheme fit to me.
Did he have I don't think he necessarily impressed. How did he do at the combine?
Off the top of my head, I'm not sure.
Okay.
I do have the numbers right in front of me, though. And he ran a 4.46, which is good for a player who is that big.
6'3", 220.
Yeah, he good vertical, good broad jump, good 3-cone. So, he's a guy kind of like Will Hernandez of UTEP, kind of aced the offseason so far to a degree. And, he's a big guy, and I don't know. I do think that you might have to package those 2 4th-rounders to move up and get him.
We'll talk interviews after this, but so to discuss your latest mock, we went through the positions, and you picked the person I would pick for the Bears, Tremaine Edmonds.
Yeah.
Could you expand more than you basically call him a Swiss Army knife that could line up opposite Leonard Floyd that does the same thing. So is that what's your thinking here?
My thinking is that the Bears need playmakers on defense, and they need just athletes, quite honestly, on defense. And he has a chance to be really good. I mean, he's only 19, which everybody knows now, but for him to do what he did at Virginia Tech at that age is pretty impressive. I think you're projecting a little bit with him as a pass rusher, but in every other area of the game, I think he's good to go. I mean, everybody talks about Roquan Smith being this great coverage linebacker, which he is. I think Edmonds is just as good of a coverage guy. And I think he's strong enough to come up and play the run. I think he has to work on getting off blocks, but man, athletically, size-wise, production-wise, he's it.
A lot of people will talk about him not having it together, that he maybe in his run keys or how he works in coverage, that a lot of times he's guessing. And I feel like I have to yell often on Twitter or even in writing that he's 19, like he's malleable.
Mm-hmm.
Is it that much of a concern that he's kind of more of an athlete, being that's a football player, than like a true football player at this stage?
Yeah, look, I mean that's always a concern with some of these guys, and you are projecting what you hope they become. But yeah, he probably is more of an athlete than a football player at this point. But I don't know. It's hard to pass up what he has, and what you can do with your defense with him in house. You can play him inside if you want him middle, and you can obviously play him outside. And you wonder if he can get bigger, if you can play him with his hand down on occasion and stuff like that. So I don't know. He's a guy where you think he can be really good, so you take him in the top 10.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, I agree with the pick, so I'm not gonna disagree too much. Okay, so interviews. So your top 5 favorite interviews. You mentioned Derwin James. So aside from Derwin James, that you went through at the combine.
Well, I really liked Minkah Fitzpatrick because I asked him about.
Oh yeah, and like that, like stories and questions. Yeah, okay.
Sure. Well, I asked him about playing for the Browns just because he seems to fit there, and they did this really weird thing last year with Jabril Peppers where they played him 30 yards off the line of scrimmage, and it kind of eliminated him from being kind of on the field sometimes, it felt like. So I asked Minkah about that, and he seemed open to doing whatever. He seemed like just a good guy, basically. Sometimes you interview these players and you're like, oh boy, I don't know about this one. But, he was impressive. I liked him. Quentin Nelson from Notre Dame, not to just keep going down the top players, but I'll tell you what.
Yeah, if that's true, it's true.
Yeah, it is. And I stood right next to his podium. I got a front row spot, basically, and I kind of felt like I was having a one-on-one interview with him. Like if you saw any of the coverage from the combine about Quentin Nelson and about his playing style and just destroying people, it was me asking the questions.
With the willpower, with the willpower thing, and like Aaron Donald and stuff, that was you? Okay.
Yep, all that stuff. And he kind of like, he's really nice, but he at the same time he's kind of frightening. And I'm a pretty big human, and he kind of gave me chills down my spine a little bit a couple times with some of the stuff he was saying. But he was good. I liked him a lot. I kind of liked Antonio Callaway, who's this wide receiver who was kicked off of Florida.
Oh yes,
Yeah,
he would have been a higher pick if not for that. I assume.
Right. Right. He would be. He was interesting, just hearing his story, and he really wanted to actually go back to Florida and play there again, and he just couldn't get it done, and he kind of waited to the last minute to enter the draft because he was just waiting to see if he could go back to Florida, and it just didn't happen. So he decided to go pro, and he has a kid now, and you really learn a personal side about some of these guys, and he was one of them. So he was good. I really liked Harrison Phillips, this defensive lineman from Stanford. He was just really smart, obviously, what you would expect from a Stanford player, but it's interesting when you write about the draft, you'll see some players, like, they'll find your stuff on Twitter or whatever, and they'll favorite it, or they'll retweet it, or they'll follow you or whatever. So I asked him, I said, so are you a draft fan? Like, are you a mock draft reader? Because I always see you, like, liking stuff. And he's like, no, that's my mom.
Oh.
Yeah, so I gave his mom a shout out in this week's mock draft, just for fun. But he was cool. He's an impressive player, and he's a big-time high school wrestler, and he can explain the game really well. And those are the kind of guys you like talking to. Some of these guys are just so boring and they give you bad answers. He was giving great answers and really open and stuff like that. So I guess those would be my 5.
Okay, perfect. On a more serious note, outside of players' mothers on Twitter and giant offensive linemen scaring you, Darius Juice yesterday, I think it was yesterday, said Wednesday night on Sirius XM that an NFL, so the running back from LSU, said that an NFL team asked him if he liked men during an interview at the scouting combine. So when those private, like, 15-minute little burst interviews they have, a lot of the football Twitter discussion has now centered around it, and this was a previous issue 2 years ago with Eli Apple as well. I mean, I'm pretty sure it's common at this point on some level. Dan, do you think that, like, the NFL team should be recorded? How to me, that's asking anybody about their sexuality over football is completely out of line. So there should be some supervision. How do we? It obviously keeps happening. It obviously happens more often than just Juice talking about it.
Yeah. It's one thing when we talk to these players and they tell us about some of the weird questions they get asked, and it's funny. Like Michael Dixon, who's probably my number 6 most favorite interview from the week. He's a punter, and he said, a team asked me to just stare as long as I could without blinking. And it ended up being the Seahawks. He ended up doing it 3 times. That's humorous. And you say, boy, that's cheesy. Why is an NFL team doing this? And it's kind of jokey. To ask a player about their sexuality, I think is kind of way beyond the line of what's acceptable. Yeah. And quite honestly, I'm pretty sure that's illegal, just in general. But
yeah, I think there were some legal documents behind that. I'm not sure exactly.
Yeah. So it's kind of sticky though if you say they should be recorded and reviewed by the league, but at the same time, some of these questions, like that one, the Eli Apple one, I think someone asked Des Bryant about his mom. Being, the unfortunate profession she had to hold. Some of that stuff is just awful. And I do think they need to figure out a way to make it not happen, whether it's recording it or having a league representative of some sort in the interview room with you, something, because, some of that stuff you're asking of a 20, 21-year-old kid who they're in the biggest interview atmosphere of their whole life, and there's no reason for it, really. I mean, it's ridiculous. And part of what I do is I talk to scouts and stuff, and I've asked a scout this year, like, why do you ask weird questions? And this was more so toward the eye blink thing, just because it was so weird. But he basically said, look, these players get so trained, whether it's by their agents or a media person that their agent hires or a former scout or general manager that their agent hires. They're trained so hard to answer everything the exact right way, how they think an NFL team wants to hear it, that these teams just ask these off the wall questions in hopes of like breaking them, so they're honest about the real questions that they want to ask. I really don't think a team cares about a player's sexuality at this point. It's 2018, for God's sake. You would hope not, but it's part of the process where they just try and break these guys out of this scripted thing that they've got set up for them.
Yeah, at any rate, too, that's not as much of like to these kinds of questions. That's not as much justification, because someone else could take offense to that. And there's other ways to do it. There's other ways to break that bubble.
Right.
I mean, I think anyone knows how to like kind of catch people off guard, but you can do it appropriately without like insulting the person, or without like at a very deep personal level, or like, I don't know. Yeah. It's a messy gray area. It's just when Juice talks about it, it's not a shocking thing, because it's already happened before. It's happened multiple times.
Yeah, and that's the sad part of it. You hate for that to become normal, but the way really the whole thing, this whole combine thing, if you really boil it down, it kind of feels like a meat market anyway, and there's a very creepy, weird level to the whole thing if you choose to look at it that way.
Okay. So we will do. I think I'd rather do the questions first and then free agency. No, let's do free agency first. Okay, so I don't know how aggressive. We'll start with the Browns. I don't know how aggressive they will be in free agency. I've seen them linked to some guys like Bashaud Breeland. Dan, what is the ultimate end goal out of this March, so out of next Tuesday and Wednesday, for the Browns to come out with? Who are you expecting?
It's funny. If you take the quarterback need that the Browns obviously have, they kind of line up similarly with the Bears, to be honest. But I think the Browns, they start with quarterback, and I think they're going to go get A.J. McCarron. I think that's their number one guy, and Sam Bradford probably after that, and then Josh McCown. But after that, I think they're going to go hard after Trumaine Johnson, the cornerback from the Rams. I think he'll be in play. And they're going to do a lot of due diligence on wide receivers and say, okay, do we want to bring back Terrell Pryor, for instance, on like a 2-year prove-it kind of deal? And then by the time free agency starts, the Browns should know if Joe Thomas is retiring. And I think he is, but if he retires, that kind of changes.
You have a gaping hole at left tackle.
Right. And they just don't have a guy there, quite honestly, on the roster. So, the Browns are interesting. They've got so much money to use. I think it's $114 million to use, which is just insane. You really got to wonder if the Browns are going to get played by some agents and players. Just the say you got Albert Wilson here, who I think is in play for the Bears. Say Albert Wilson's agent goes to the Bears and says, hey guys, thanks for the offer of $7 million a year or whatever it is. But the Browns are offering me 9. Will you do 8?
Negotiating bar. Okay.
Right. And I kind of wonder if the Browns are going to get used here just because they've got so much money. And why would you want to go play for a team that's been 1-31 over the last 2 years?
Right.
So, that part of it is really fascinating to me, but I do think they're going to be aggressive. They were super aggressive to start free agency last year. They went and got Kevin Zeitler and some other players. They gave Joel Bitonio, their left guard, a bunch of money. If you recall, they traded for Brock Osweiler and a second-round pick, I think, on the first day or second day of free agency. So, if they're like that again this year, obviously different front office, but they could make some moves or they could be used. We'll see.
It's interesting that you mention I hate to go back to this like conversation topic all the time, but of quarterback. But instead, you mentioned AJ McCarron. How afraid are you that they're gonna Brock Osweiler or Mike Glennon, AJ McCarron, give him that kind of deal, or more commitment even?
I think AJ McCarron, if he comes to the Browns, he's going to get a huge deal anyway. So,
right.
It's not my money. They have a ton of money to spend. It is what it is. If they give him 4 years and $62 million, which is a little bit more than Mike Glennon got, I don't know. I think that's his range for the Browns. And if you're the Browns, you have to overpay guys. That's just the way it is. So it is what it is.
It's the whole plan, I assume, because you don't really want Darnold playing right away if he's the guy.
Right. That's also true. I mean, whether it's Darnold, Rosen, Mayfield, or God forbid Josh Allen. Oops. Yeah, I think you got to sit whoever it is at least a year and go from there.
Moving to the Bears. Okay, so you mentioned the first guy, Albert Wilson.
Mm-hmm.
So they've been so they're already linked to Wilson and Robinson. What do you think of those fits as like sort of a preview? Robinson, it looks like it's either going to be the 49ers or Bears for him. In particular,
I don't see any reason why they shouldn't sign both of them, quite honestly, if they can, because
right.
Wilson to me is a slot only player, and Robinson, boy, if he's healthy, you got a legit player. I mean, everything that's offseason for Chicago needs to be, you have to answer the question of how does this make Mitchell Trubisky better? And obviously Robinson would do that in a hurry. So if you're confident that his knee is healthy, I would make him one of the richest wide receivers in the NFL. And Wilson, that was one of the great quotes out of the combine when Brett Veach, the Chiefs general manager, was up. Someone asked him about Albert Wilson and stuff like that, and he said Matt Nagy's in Chicago now, so he'll probably go there, or whatever he said.
I think it was Matt's in Chicago. I think
yeah. So that was funny. That's probably true. I don't think he's going to cost a ton. Like I said, he's a slot guy, and I think he can be pretty effective.
Because I know you're not necessarily. I know you're not Ian Rappaport or anything, but your gut sense on Robinson, who in my mind is the number one available receiver in this market, where he goes.
I'm gonna say Chicago, just because.
Because you're on a Bears podcast.
Because I'm on a Bears podcast. No, I looked this up earlier. I was surprised the Bears had quite as much money under the cap that they did. So if you can make one or two big, huge splashes, I think that would be great. And if you start with Allen Robinson, man, you're pretty legit, I think.
Yeah, you give Trubisky a true guy who can probably win against most defensive backs. It's perfect. Okay, so that's Trey Burton as a fit has also some guy in our internet age, Dan. People do social media snooping, so people think with Robinson, for just going back to him for a second, because he tweets at Adrian Amos so much that there's a connection there. Adrian Amos, the current Bears safety, Penn State teammates. Oh, he's recruiting him. Right. So with Trey Burton, Mitch Trubisky followed Trey Burton on Instagram randomly last week. What do you think of him as a fit? The Eagles tight end, that is.
Yeah, he's interesting because you obviously see him and you say, boy, he's a tight end, he's a fullback, an H-back, he plays special teams, but how good is he really? I pulled up his stats while we were talking here. He had 23 catches last year for less than 250 yards and 5 touchdowns. So he's a solid player, but he's not a guy where I would say, oh, yeah, we got to get Trey Burton. We're going to be set if we get Trey Burton. I think he's a good piece, but it's kind of like the Dolphins several years ago where they brought in Charles Clay from the Bills, and everyone was like, oh, man, we got Charles Clay. What has Charles Clay done since then? And it hasn't been much. So I like Trey Burton. I think Trey Burton's a good piece. I love players who take up multiple positions on the depth chart. But I just think he's kind of a good piece, not a game changer.
Yeah, and especially as a number 2 tight end, if he's going to get 7 or 8 million, are you paying 7 or 8 million for? I like him personally, but I can see that lot. Like, are you paying 7 or 8 million for 30 catches for 25 catches? That's
Exactly.
that's an awful lot.
Yep.
I know you let it slip. You had your Freudian slip of Josh Allen. My God forbid is the Bears signing Jarvis Landry and giving him mega money. So what do you think about that if they perhaps swing and miss on Robinson and sign Landry?
Well, I'll tell you, there was a lot of talk about that happening at the Combine.
Right, the Jordan Howard trade, exactly.
Yeah, and not even just adding Jordan Howard in there, just in general, the Bears going after Landry. Look, I liked him a lot coming out of LSU, and I thought he was just as good as Odell Beckham. I think, obviously, hindsight, I was wrong there, but he's just so effective. I mean, I think more than half of his catches were for first downs, and I know you look at the low average per catch thing with him, but man, just so dependable. He's a guy that I wouldn't be upset if he was on my team. Now, obviously, it depends on what you'd have to give up if they trade him, but I don't know. I think he's a pretty good player. I don't think he's a superstar, but so dependable. And if you bring him in, I think that kind of takes Albert Wilson off the board a little bit because they're kind of redundant. But I think he's pretty good.
With Landry, it's like that's the crazy thing to me because I liked him coming out of LSU too because I thought he could be more of a deep threat, more of a downfield weapon. I mean, I don't know what happened to him in the NFL. I don't know if it's the scheme but he just doesn't do it. Like he has the occasional circus catch like Beckham does, like on those deep passes, but he just doesn't do it otherwise.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'd have to really go in and rewatch what Miami did with him because maybe it is just a thing where it's the system there where they just say, okay, go out 7-8 yards and turn around and catch the ball, and that's your role. I don't know. So I will be interested to see if he leaves there, what he does elsewhere, because I think he's going to catch a ton of passes. Now, whether or not he becomes a 12 to 14 yard per catch player, we'll see.
Yeah, well, if anything, I again, God forbid.
Sure.
So you guys heard it here first. Dan pulling out his Ian Rappaport sources. Calvin Robinson to the Bears. Jarvis Landry maybe. Okay, so we'll finish up. We do have actually like 2 questions. I'll start with the less deep one. The other one we can capitalize on from some listeners. The kicker class, Dan, of this year is any worth drafting? And if not, who's the guy that could be a good undrafted free agent for the Bears to pick up? Because they do have issues there.
Just kicker or punter as well.
Let's just maybe punter too, because Pat O'Donnell might not return because he might get pricey. He's finishing up his rookie deal. So
sure,
kicker and punter.
Well, I can tell you a lot more about Michael Dixon of Texas than you ever wanted to know, but I think he's draftable and he's really good. But kickers, I'm not a huge special teams guy, to be quite honest with you, but everyone seems to like Daniel Carlson of Auburn quite a bit. Considering the Bears are, what do they have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 picks. I might not pick on a specialist this year. Like if they had an extra pick or two, I probably would, but it's just such a position where you can wait and pick up a guy. I wouldn't use a pick if I were the Bears on a kicker.
You wait on that? Okay. Yeah, I mean, I agree. I don't look at kickers at all. I hear about the guy personally. It's not. I mean, I don't even know how you would scout a kicker. Just who makes the kicks, who has distance on their kicks at this point, and who's accurate. There's nothing much else there. Finally, to cap this whole podcast off, give me 3 best trade down partners for the Bears from number 8.
Oh,
if you could play around.
Yeah. Well, I do really wonder about the Dolphins stuff. If they swap 8 and 11, and you somehow work Landry into that, and just figure out a way, I think that one is the first most interesting one to me. And then you look at who's behind the Bears and who might want to jump the 49ers or Raiders, for instance. So in that regard, you're thinking, okay, this is the Bears not taking Tremaine Edmonds at 8, and it's stopping the 49ers from taking him or Roquan Smith or a team wanting a cornerback, something like that. But and then the flip side, the Raider, when you throw in Vita Vea from Washington, so you think, do the Redskins come up from 13 to make sure that they get the guy that they want in Vea? You look at, the Cowboys at 19 are interesting, just because they might be a defensive lineman away from just having a really great front on defense. But that's pretty far back if you're the Bears to drop back. I mean, you'd probably be getting a 2019 first round pick for that kind of move. And then, you really have to kind of daydream a little bit and say, the Bills are there at 21 and 22. What if they want to come all the way up for somebody? Is that fair value, trading 8 for 21 and 22? I think it's pretty close, actually.
I think it's close. I think it's like another 4th rounder or something.
Yeah. And, if you're the Bears, I'll tell you, that would be real interesting, because then you're sitting in a spot where, maybe you don't want to bank on the upside of Edmonds, and you want to say, okay, we got Fuller back here on a transition tag, and so they're going to bring him back. They probably need another cornerback. That's a great range for a cornerback. Depending on what happens here in free agency, they could go wide receiver. One of those edge guys might still be there that we talked about earlier. That would be real fascinating if the Bears move down to those 2 Bills picks.
What about maybe like a quarterback trade? So the Cardinals in 15.
Yeah.
Is that a big possibility? I'm not.
That one too. The thing with the quarterback stuff is, who do you have to get in front of to get a quarterback? And so by the time you get to 8 already, you're looking at the Browns, the Broncos, the Jets, maybe
the Bengals,
the Giants, maybe the Bengals is a kind of far outside one, I think. But for a quarterback, you might not have to get up quite that high, or you're going to have to get up much higher than that. 8's kind of a weird spot to trade for a quarterback, I think, which of course means that it's going to happen. Yes,
that would be ideal. Again, your Ian Rappaport sources confirming this. Thank you, Dan.
Sure.
That should just about wrap up this podcast of WCG Radio, everybody. Thanks to Dan Kadar, who is, again, as I mentioned, one of the best draft sources, best draft coverers you'll find on the internet. He is SB Nation's NFL draft editor, and you can follow him on Twitter at Mocking the Draft. I'm sure you've seen him around him. If you follow football, if you follow the draft, you've seen Dan around. You've seen his mocks. You've seen his coverage. It's there. But just in case, follow him on Twitter at Mocking the Draft. Check out his work at SB Nation, at Mocking the Draft. It's also the website. Dan, thank you so much for hopping on.
Sure thing. Thanks for having me.
You can follow me on Twitter at Robert Zaglinski. Follow us on Twitter at WC Gridiron. We'll have a lot of coverage over free agency the next few days. It should be fun. Hopefully, it'll end well, which I'll talk about on Monday with Lester. At any rate, stay classy, everybody.